Welcome to P English Literature, a YouTube channel that conveys Amazon, Goodread, blog, and video book reviews coupled with interviews with authors. It's a perfect channel for book lovers, authors, and writers generally. P English Literature, the exact channel for you and me. Hi there, viewers. Today I'm joining in conversation with Terry Lister, the author of My New Day Dawn, a solo journey into West Africa. It's a pleasure to have Mr. Terry on the show. Hi there, Mr. Terry.
Hi, I'm doing fine, Peter. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm truly excited to speak with you concerning your book.
I enjoyed your review, actually. It was very nice.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you very much for that. So, Mr. Terry, without actually wasting much time, I'd love to just, move straight into the interview rather. When I read your book, I found it very wholesome and I find it absolutely fascinating. And I love the fact that, you have a lot of information to communicate in it. An obvious fact that most Westerners have some sort of ill perception towards African and their countries, which made most people disrespect or devalue the country. And I want to ask you, what inspired you to take a tour to these four West African countries? Apart from writing a travelogue, is there anything that particularly intrigued you to visit West Africa?
Well, let me take you to the start. I retired in 2014. I started to travel in this manner then, and I went to Central and South America. People were poking at me saying, please write a blog. I said, no, I'm not going to do it. Then I finished my journeys there and I prepared to come to Africa. And the thing that bothered me the most, having lived in Bermuda, just off the coast of America, 700 miles away, was the attitude of Americans towards Africa. They've always looked down and that sort of thing. And they feel that Africa is inferior, when in fact the history says the West got rich off of the minerals and everything else that was taken out of Africa, not to mention 20 million people. Yeah. So, it's just not properly balanced. My view was that I should come over and be an observer. I don't wish to direct anybody. My background says I'm qualified to, but I don't. I observe and make note. And I, as honestly as I possibly can, relay the story back so that the people in the West get a better feel for what's really there. Now, I think I can do this just because I'm a black man who's been a black man all my life and looks at life a certain way. When you go and you try to research books on Africa, especially directed towards tourists, they're not written by people who look like me, which automatically says they're coming from another point of view. So that's what I was trying to accomplish.
Wow, that's really find very fascinating because, I love some facts they were expounded in the book. And that wants me to ask you another set of questions. I see that your book is a combination of travel experience and history. And I particularly love the fact that you made reference to places of tourist attraction and the places that you visited, in Ghana, in the Ivory Coast, etc. Then you spoke about war experiences, political instability, the condition of the country, and the good and the ugly side. And I find these techniques of writing, absolutely amazing. And I was going to ask you to know if there's anything that particularly inspired you to use this method or style in your novel.
Well, first and foremost, I'm a traveler, and so I should be telling a travel story. However, everything should be contextual, and I should also reflect on what's being said and what the reality is. For instance, the Basilica in Ivory Coast, the largest church in the world. Imagine the largest church in the world. It's all almost in a jungle area. Yet, because this was done by the president, there were people who opposed it. And to this day, You can pick up an article. You go online and you can find an article less than 2 years old that says this place is empty every week. There are no more than 200 people that go there.
Wow.
So I go there. I arrive in town on a Saturday evening. Sunday morning, I'm at church. The church can seat 7,500 people.
Wow.
And then there's standing room for as many more as that. So I go, and by the time I get there, the service has started, and I wait patiently along with others for a seat. They're very organized. The ushers come and get you and give you a seat. Somebody else leaves, they go and get somebody else. It's continual. Peter, there were no seats.
Wow.
This was just a Sunday. It wasn't Easter Sunday. It wasn't Christmas. It wasn't 7,000 people's birthday. It was just a Sunday. And the place was packed. Yet you can find articles online that say 250 people every week in a place that can have 7,500. So that's the sort of thing that motivates me, okay?
Yeah.
So anyone who reads my book knows that it's not 250 every week. I was not there on Easter Sunday when people go to church. It was just Sunday.
Wow.
So you see, that's what inspires me.
Wow, that's very fascinating, and I'm quite intrigued about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also want to ask you another question. African has continued to be looked down upon by the Western powers. There's a kind of a negative perception and representation, such as civil unrest, political instability, corruption, greed, diseases, poverty, selfishness, among many other barbaric misrepresentation that have been defining the characters of Africa and the Africans in the mind of many Western people. I want to have your opinion about this. What sort of perception do you think that most Westerners have towards Africa and its countries?
Well, portrayal through the media tells you something day in and day out. So that's how your opinion is formed. In fact, in my first book, in the introduction of 3 or 4 pages, I talked about this. And I said, please come to Africa and see for yourself rather than sitting in front of the television, because that's giving you a different picture, okay?
Yeah.
So that has a big impact. But some of the things are true. There's graft and corruption. I am strongly opposed to that. It means that the money that should go in the treasury and develop the country doesn't go there. So that's a bad point. But the second thing is the people who do this graft really don't care about their country
at all.
They only care about what they can get. And so because of that, when you work down the line, people in other jobs working for the government are poorly paid because there isn't enough money to pay them, because this guy has all the money. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so resultantly, the only way these people can survive is by following the leader. And so when I'm on the road, the police pull the car over on the regular and everybody has to pay. It's just to pay his wages. I was going from one part of a country to another part, and the bus was pulled over and everybody had to get off, and they checked all their documents. Some native people had documents that were not in order. I, as a foreigner, was automatically taken out. And so I get taken inside to the captain, big, strong-looking man, and he's got his team, and he says, well, your paper's okay, but it's very hot today. And I say, yes, it is hot. He said, it'd be nice if we could all have a beer. I said, well, I think you could. So I reached my pocket, I gave him enough money that I knew would only pay for maybe half of them. So he looks at it and says, oh, this won't take care of everybody. I said, well, yes, but I've taken care of at least half. Someone else will do the rest. And that was it. Now, I actually didn't mind doing that because I'd been in the country long enough to know how it worked.
Yeah.
And so that's the downside, okay? So all of a sudden it looks like everybody in the country is a thief. They're not. I would never say that. But you have a hardworking man and women who struggle to get enough money to take going, keep their family going. And so they take what they consider to be a little bit. I don't know if you know this or not, but the civil servants in Liberia regularly were paid 3 and 4 months late. So imagine you go to your job 5 days a week, for 3 months before you get money. I don't know how your family survives. So this is the type of thing that results, and then I have a great sense of empathy for it, not criticism. I'm not prepared to criticize. I'm looking at it from an empathetic point of view. Now, you take Liberia again as an example. I got there 3 months after George Weah had gone into office. And so I have high hopes for what George Weah can do. Well, 3 years have passed and things aren't much better, which is sad and makes me sad that that's the case. But then again, the leader can only do so much. So it's up to the leader to build a team that's committed and move the country forward.
Wow, that's actually true. All these things you're talking about, it's something that is very rampant, something that is very predominant here. Even here in Nigeria, it happens. It happens very well.
Yeah.
So it's something that I think it's much particular to most African nations. Okay, that want to make me to move into my next question. And I was going to ask you if you can tell us more about your experience in Sierra Leone. I've heard a lot of good things about Sierra Leone, and I've gotten to know much about their experience with war and some other things. So I was hoping to get to know more about your experience with Sierra Leone. That would be fun if you can share with us some of your experience there.
Well, Peter, what I do, I'm out for 8 weeks, I'm back, pre-COVID, of course. And so when I go back to Bermuda on the 8 weeks, I take care of my business issues. The Civil War was financed by blood diamonds, as they called them. So I wanted to go and see some of the diamond operations. And I wanted to see just a small one where little guys were just out there trying to make a living. I wanted to see a big operation run by a big company. Well, the day that I went off to do it, it was less than 10 days before the election.
Wow.
And so when the guys who were handling me, so to speak, took me to this company, they interviewed me thoroughly, and I gave a report to the president of the company about me. And he, I assume, decided that he didn't want to take a chance because I might have been a reporter. I might have been a supporter of the opposition party. And so I could have done something. And so he refused to let me see the diamond mines. So I didn't see the operation there. Instead, I saw 2 small operations. And I was quite satisfied I learned how the thing works, so to speak. But here's something interesting. The minute I got into Sierra Leone, because my trip started there, I flew there from Amsterdam, my WhatsApp started to go off. And a local man started to WhatsApp me out of nowhere. I didn't know the man. And he was offering me diamonds, trying to get me to buy them. And Peter, if I had bought those diamonds and they found them on me at some point, I'd still be in Sierra Leone, enjoying myself. I guess the prisons are nice. So I didn't buy, of course. But that's the type of thing that happens. And the government in Sierra Leone gets only a small share of the revenue it should get from the diamond business. A lot of the diamonds are sold in small quantities to people like me, and nobody gets their share. They sold in big quantities to other countries and other diamond merchants, and the government gets cut out. So you see, these are some of the challenges that people face. Now, when I went around the country, I saw, for instance, just on the outskirts of Freetown, back in August of 17, they had a mudslide. And it was off a mountain. It just came straight down, and quite a number of people were killed.
Wow.
This happened largely because, as you know, in many countries, not Africa, many countries all over the world, about 30 years ago or more, people started to leave the farms and go to the cities. Regardless of whether they could get a job, they went there because it was better, they believed.
Yeah.
And so in many countries, there are terrible slums, which are the result of people trying to get a better life, okay? So in this case, all of these little shantytown type houses were built on this mountainside. And the environmentalists had warned against it, the government did nothing. And so the slide came and all of these people were killed. And that's the type of thing that happens when you don't enforce the laws you have. Many times, in many countries, you don't need new laws. You just need the ones you have on the books followed and executed. And so that was the case there. So these are the types of things that I would see. You also have this cultural challenge, and it's really hard. I understand it, and I don't have an answer for it. People will, as you know, go out at night and kill the wild animals for food. As prices go up for chicken, which people are content to eat, as the price goes up and gets out of their range, the guys are going out at night and killing whatever they can find. That bothers me a lot, but they're forced to do it because they can't get chicken at a price that they can afford. They can't get fish at a price they can afford. And so this is a balance. This is a big balance that governments have to come up with. Now, in some of the safari countries, as I'm sure you know, what they've done is they've taken the guys who were poachers and they made them guides. So rather than throwing them in jail for 50 years, they're actually guiding and doing the honest thing and making a good living. So whenever I'm in a place like that, I always hire a guide, always, because the price of the guide in Western money is next to nothing. The price in his dollars, in his currency, is big money. You know, he's happy to have that job. But what happens is every day, 30 guides show up and 10 get hired. So 20 people don't get paid. So I always say, I'm going to pay somebody today. And depending on what type of exercise it is, if it's going up tough terrain, I get the biggest guy. And sometimes he's had to carry me up. But that's how we do it.
Wow. I love the way you express to us some of the experience you've seen in Sierra Leone. And the indiscriminate killing of the wildlife for food, for money, and some other things. It's something that I think needs urgent attention and attention of the government to it. Then I also want to ask you, this question is a bit different from your book, but as a traveler who has been to several African countries, I'd love to know if you have any sort of prejudice towards any of the African countries you visited.
Prejudice.
Yeah, prejudice.
No. I tell you what, where I've had unfortunate experiences, it's the person in me. It's not the country.
It's not
the country didn't make that person do it,
Exactly.
So I don't hold the country. I to be honest, I'm always a little nervous when I'm writing about the so-called corruption, because I see it as an experience and I've explained to you how I see it.
Yeah.
But I don't want my readers to go, see, even Terry says they're doing it. No. So you have to balance what you see, what you say about what you see. I find the opposite to the prejudice. I want to talk about the excitement from seeing really wonderful and impressive things.
Okay.
The book that you've read is book 2. I'm now getting myself geared up to write book 3. And in book 3, one of the countries I went to was Namibia. Now, all my life, I've been a traveler. All my life, I've been interested in countries. I've been interested in Africa. The only thing I knew about Namibia was that some time ago, SWAPO had been fighting to get the country independent. And once they got it independent, they fall off the radar. Nobody talks about it. So I'm going to go to Namibia. I started doing my research. My plan is to go there for 2 weeks. Peter, I found so many interesting things that I went there for a month. And I could have stayed 2 more weeks.
Wow.
It is such an impressive country. And they really need to get their story out. So I talk about them all the time because I think they are worthy. It's just so many different things in that one country. It reminds me, in the other side of the world, of Colombia. I spent 5 weeks in Colombia, and they had just about everything you could think of other than safaris. They have no big animals, but they have everything else.
Wow. Well, that's quite very amazing. No, Namibia, I've heard good things about that too. And I would really love to know your opinion about that. If you eventually come up with your book 3, that'll be exciting.
Well, I'm a big fan. I'm a complete fan of Namibia, but here, I'll give you the downside. And I think South Africa suffered from it too. After you fight hard for independence and you get it, the people who've carried you through are worthy. They're worthy of being, giants and respected as giants. But there comes a time in politics where the party and government should change. You can't have one party forever and ever. You have to have changes. And I'm a big believer in that.
Wow.
Well, while I was there, they were getting ready for an election. And I was talking to some young people. And, you know, all over the world, the young people are the revolutionaries. Old people like me just make sure we're close to the front, and after it's over, we get to take over. But we don't lead it. We don't do it. Young people do it. So I'm talking to some young people. I'm saying, well, what do you think? And they say, well, SWAPO hasn't delivered on all their promises. We were supposed to get land. We were supposed to get housing. It hasn't really happened. I mean, there is a huge, huge slum going out of Windhoek. You can go up on a hill and look out at night, and you'll see all these lights going way out. And then the person I was with who showed me said, Terry, you see how far those lights go? I said, yes, that's the slum. But there's something even worse than a slum behind it that goes back just as far. Okay, so the people have their concern. So I said, well, it sounds like it's time to vote SWAPO out. I didn't shout these things, I said quietly, but it sounds like that. And the young people said, well, we can't, because if we do, they won't go, and then we'll have a civil war. And that's what they actually believed. And, you know, the young people are supposed to be the revolutionaries. So they see it as, we can't do this. What do? You know, does SWAPO have the right to run the country forever? Does the ANC have the right to run South Africa forever? You see, these are things, you won't have true democracy until the party that took you to independence becomes the opposition party and then legitimately wins it back. That's real independence, okay? And so those countries still have to deal with that. And so these are the types of things that I take note of.
Wow, that's very amazing. That's super amazing. There's also a section of your book that I find absolutely humorous. That was the part you were entering Liberia from Syria, though. I read of your experience with the corrupt Liberian health officer. You know, when you need to appeal your health regulation, after the officer made it known to you that there is an outbreak of meningitis in the country. You know, this particular part interests me a lot, and I would appreciate if you could share the story with us a little bit.
Well, you know, it was super interesting in that often I find myself having little bumps with the immigration officials as you go across. It can be any sort of thing, and I do my best because I want to get through, and I know you can only push so hard. This was the first time that in a while that I just gone straight through. Everybody I need to see, I saw, and I was starting to walk out the building, heading for the bridge that took you across. And somebody stepped up, a soldier stepped up, put his hand out and said, no, you have to go down this hole. I said, why? See the health officer. Oh, it's the first time it had happened to me to see the health officer. So when I go and I get in the room, and Peter, I make a practice every time I come back to Bermuda. Once I've decided what countries I'm going to, I go to our health people, our clinic, and tell them where I'm going. And they look at we have a little yellow card. And they look at my little card and they say, okay, Terry, everything's okay. Or they'll say, oh, you need a shot for this. I say, fine, I get the shot. As far as I'm concerned, they're very competent. I never expect to get somewhere and find that I don't have the shot. So this man tells me about this meningitis outbreak, how dangerous it is. And he doesn't have to tell me. I've had a young friend who died from meningitis when we were early 20s. Yeah, so I take it seriously. When he said meningitis, all the radars came on. And so I'm waiting for him to say, well, wind up your sleeve. I'm going in this drawer. I'm going to bring out my jab, you know, my needle. I'm going to jab you and you'll be fine. So I'm all ready for this. And lo and behold, he said to me, yes, he's looking at my card and he says, yes, you have no stem for meningitis. We have to fix this. I said, okay, yeah, well, let's go ahead. I'm unwinding my shirt. And he says, give me $20 and I'll write it in your card.
Wow.
I was livid. I was absolutely livid. Either you have the meningitis or you don't. It's not something to play about. If you just want some of my money, maybe you should just tell me you want my money.
Exactly.
So once I calmed down, I refused the 20, but I knew I was going to be there much longer than I wanted to be if I stayed stuck on zero. So I gave him $10 instead. He was happy. I was happy to leave, and away I went.
Can you imagine? That's actually very humorous because when I read about the part, I burst into laughter. I was laughing uncontrollably. And I was like, I'm gonna ask you more about this so you can shed more light about it. It's actually very humorous. Yes, I also want to ask you, as a foreign traveler, what are the things you saw in Africa that you wish there could be changes to? What are the things that piqued your interest in terms of community development? I don't know if you
Ah,
understand my question.
well, as a country goes forward, there are many things that you have to do that are bigger than your purse. And it really requires the government to be competent in getting contracts and
Yes.
to ensure that they're carried out properly, that there are penalty clauses and all of this sort of thing. The biggest need, especially in West Africa, that I've seen, apart from obviously education, the biggest other need is infrastructure. In my book, I went from Monrovia, capital of Liberia,
Yeah.
to Harper, which is just on the border of Ivory Coast. Harper was one of the important cities 200 years ago, and the longest serving president, a fellow named Tubman, served over 25 years, and he came from Harper. So you would think that the road from Harper to Monrovia would be paved with gold because the 25-year president lived there. No, it wasn't. There was a very nice road that took us out of Monrovia. For 3 hours, we drove and it was beautiful.
Wow.
And the driver said, look, we're going to stop, have a little food. So I said, great, this is very nice. Got out of the car, went and got something to eat, came back to the car at the appointed time. We drove on a beautiful road for about 10 more minutes. Then we turned off and we were on the road from hell. It was horrible. I kept checking my phone and doing measurements, And at one point in a whole hour, we went 9 miles.
Wow.
Imagine 9 miles. It was just awful. And near the end of the journey, I actually saw a couple of big contracts where the road was going to be rebuilt.
Okay.
That eats up a lot of money. Roads are very expensive, but it has to be done. As an example, several of the countries in this part of the world have produce grown out in the countryside that can't get to the market because they don't have refrigerated trucks. And the time it takes to get from the countryside to the city, the stuff spoils. And so mangoes, as an example, you can go through a lot of towns and see mangoes raining down the tree, but at the foot of the tree, a lot of rotten mangoes. And you say, well, why? Because nobody can get them to the market. And so if you walk by and the owner's in the yard and he sees you pick 2 off of his tree, I guess he would turn to you and say, take 2 more, please. Because what's he going to do with them, you see? So one thing leads to another. If you build the infrastructure, the economic growth will just come with it because the products are already there going to waste.
Wow. Wow. That's actually very amazing. That's very amazing. I don't know, you also wrote about Liberia, and I don't know if you can just share with us some of your experience in Liberia too.
Well, in Monrovia, it was really a question of going around and trying to get an understanding and appreciation of how the Civil War affected the city.
Okay.
There's some buildings that are still not in use because it was destroyed so much. There's some that have been totally restored. Beyond that, I went out into the countryside and I went up to a place called Tubmanville, which is about 2 hours away from Monrovia going northwest. And I went to see what was called the Blue Lake. Now, this area had been used for mining many years, and then the market fell. And so the company responsible just got up and left after, I guess they had a few bad years, lost money, and they said, we may as well leave. So they left, and they left all the equipment right there. Well, through time, the rain coming down filled the bottom, and there's now a lake and
Wow.
the minimum depth is like 30 feet. And so you have this place where people come and picnic and all of that, but at the very bottom of the lake is still all the mining equipment, which will never come out. So I found that an interesting thing to go and see. I went down to Buchanan, which is a town right on the Atlantic Ocean. Again, an early town that was developed, and it's the depot for all the iron ore product. So it comes in from the countryside by train, and it's dropped there. It was interesting. I saw up close the challenge between developing tourism and developing industry, because they have a beautiful beach, and about, I'd say, no more than a quarter of a mile from the beachfront, a company has been given a contract to go in and dig and see if they can find any oil. So imagine if they find oil there,
Wow.
so close to the best beach in the country, you know? So these are the challenges that development entails.
Wow. That's true. That's actually very interesting. I also read about your experience with an Ivory Coast driver who collected 5,500 cephas for a journey worth of 1,500 cephas. I would love to. This is actually something something I considered very usual. Once someone sights a newcomer or a stranger in a particular location in some African countries, how do you feel about this? And could you tell us a little bit about this too?
Okay. I have this thing I say to people when I tell them as a joke. I say, if anybody says to me, brother, the minute he says brother, I say, that's a crook. He's trying to steal from me, because he got overly close. It wasn't real close to me and my pocketbook. But it's a little joke, because that has happened. But I tend to feel that, let's see, first, I check the prices. How much of this journey cost? How much of the entrance to this place costs? I know all of that beforehand. Sometimes I have it written right there and I can look at it. Sometimes I put it in my head and I may forget it. And so that instance there, I just forgot. I had no idea I was paying 5 times the price. And that's happened to me on 3 occasions that I can think of. When a person charges me 300 CFAs, that should be 150. My reaction depends on the situation. It's not about money. It's about, should I let this guy show all the other guys that I'm an easy mark, take my money for the rest of the day? And so I'll say, no, I'm not going to do that. So I'll fuss over the money and it'll come down to something that looks like the real price. But as you know, the difference between 150 CFAs, it's nothing in US dollars. It's very, very small, but it's the principle in that case. If, on the other hand, I'm out doing something, and to put it in US dollars, this thing I'm doing should be $3, and the person asks $5, and they just look to me like someone who's working hard, trying to hustle, feed their family, I'll quietly pay them the $5. And I'm not going to make a fuss over it, because I'm always very sympathetic towards people who work hard. You can tell when you see people, this guy and that girl, they're really at it. I can remember moving about in one of the countries in East Africa, where I moved around 3 times. And every time I moved, I had to move super early. One time I left the hotel at 4, the next time was 5, the final time I left at 6 o'clock was like 3 in the afternoon, 6 o'clock instead of 4. But on the first trip, after an hour, we're out in the countryside now, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm passing ladies walking along, balancing a hoe on their head. That takes real talent. But they're going to the farm, 5 o'clock in the morning. And you can't tell me that the word lazy is anywhere associated with that person.
Yeah.
You see? And so to me, that sort of thing is important. And I appreciate when I observe these things, I see what people do. There should always be dignity in a job, but sometimes there's jobs that a man wouldn't want to do. You go in the marketplace in some cities and in towns, you'll see men selling socks to make some money. You know, a man doesn't really want to be in the market selling socks,
Yeah, yeah.
but there they are. There they are. The choice is sell those socks or sit by the road. So he sells the socks. So my reaction is one of respect. You know, I respect that person for being willing to do it. I have responsibilities. This is how I'm going to meet him. And so I'm glad to see that and to be able to tell the story. You know, I have a lot of little stories that I can tell from my observances, and I tell them to people to make them stop and think about, wow, this is really how it is.
That's fascinating. That's very good. And I'm so excited to know your opinion about that. You know, I also read about your humorous experience while traveling in pitch darkness from Ivory Coast to Ghana. And
Yes.
now there was, neither street light nor moonlight. And you felt like screaming. When I read that part, I was like, oh my God, this book is too humorous. And then you felt like screaming. So I was, waiting to ask you, could you share with us a little bit of the story? At least we would love to know about that.
Well, let me say this first.
Okay.
Because I travel as I do, my experiences are very different from the tourist who's met at the airport by a guide and takes them around the whole time. So the Africa they see and the Africa I see are two different Africas. Okay, right off the bat, there's two different Africas. The places where I eat and where they eat, totally different.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Now, because I'm traveling the way I travel, I get to a depot and I say, right, I'm going to such place. How soon? They say, well, we were supposed to leave here in half an hour, but as soon as the car is full. Okay, so I'm going to wait for the car to get full. I was going from Bo to the border in Sierra Leone, where ultimately I had that incident with the medical guy. I waited in the hottest day I'd experienced. I waited in the depot for 4 hours for the car to fill.
Wow.
It's just how it is. It's just how it is. So when I did this trip that you're referring to, I left my hotel at 8 o'clock in the morning. The distance was such that if I had a car that just was going to take me point to point, I would have been there 2 o'clock at the latest.
Imagine.
Instead, I got to one point, waited an hour and a half. Got to the second point, waited an hour and a half. Got to the third point and had to wait. So there's waits all in between and they take it out. So by the time I got to where I was going and got out of the car, standing by the road sign now, in the middle of nowhere, so to speak, it's already about 9 o'clock at night. I could have got there at 2. It's 9 o'clock. It's pitch black. I see a taxi. I say, thank God. So I take my bag and I start moving towards the taxi. And I go up to the driver and say, listen, I'm trying to go to this resort. And he says, okay. So I go around to the back to put my bag in the back. And as I go walking past, he drove off. He just took off. And I looked around and there are no other taxis.
Wow.
So I'm trying to think, well, why did he drive off? And what am I going to do? And as I say, I find people friendly most of the time. This night, they weren't friendly. There were a number of people around. Nobody raised their hand. Nobody looked at me like, this guy needs help. None of that. And so after a few minutes, I'm starting to think, this could be bad. This could be bad. But I saw a taxi coming by. I put my bag down. I started throwing my hands and all of this sort of thing. And finally, the guy drove right up to me. I told him where I wanted to go. So he said, okay, he put me in. So I was happy. Now, on the journey from Ivory Coast into Ghana, you drive right by the ocean most of the time. You can sit in the car and you see the ocean. However, lucky me, and I'm going to a resort on the ocean. So I think when I get out of my car to get the taxi, I'm going to be a stone's throw away, and if it had been daylight, I might even been tempted to say, oh, I'll walk, forget it. Well, Peter, it turned out that wasn't the case at all. The car had worked its way more and more inland.
Wow.
So when I got in that taxi, pitch black, because we're now away from the real developed areas, so it's no houses there.
Yeah.
It took about 20 minutes or so to get to the resort. And I was actually shocked. I wasn't expecting that. Now, the people had said to me, oh, we'll call you and make sure somebody picked you up. Well, I called them several times. I sent them emails. Nobody responded. I had no contact. So I now I get a taxi. I'm going there. I get there. I get to the front desk and there's nobody there.
Wow.
And there's a sign saying, check in at the restaurant. Okay, I'll check in at the restaurant. There are all these units like in a hut design. And so I start walking around. Nothing looks like a restaurant to me. So finally I go up to one of the units and I knock against the door and I disturb some people who were already asleep. I thought it was possibly the hotel, the restaurant. I went to a second place, did the same thing. Well, these people pointed out where the restaurant was. I went over to the restaurant and I was greeted properly. And the guy said, hang on a minute, I'll take you to where you're going to stay. I go to the place where I'm going to stay and the room is about the size of a small dining table. I couldn't believe it. And I'm hot, I'm tired, I'm bothered. And I say, no, I'm not staying in this place. You get me another room. And so they were happy to get me a much bigger room, charge me a little bit more, but that was okay. I was comfortable. But these are the experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds interesting. You know, your book is actually very interesting. And I love the fact that some of your experience are a little bit, combined together in a way that, light up the reader. That's a very nice approach. Then I was also going to ask you, as a traveler who has been to several African countries, what sort of noticeable similarities or difference do you think exist between these countries, if you could perceive anyone that you would love to share with us?
Well, I'll tell you, I've been to 21 countries. Okay. Africa is so big, that means I haven't been to 33. So I've been to fewer than half. So talking in generalizations could present an unfair picture. But I'll say this, the East Africa is really the most developed area and part of Africa. And there's a lot of good things going on. Infrastructure is good, that sort of thing. West Africa, as a group, there are, I think, 9 or 12 countries, most of which I've been to, or half of which I've been to. They are really lacking in development. The wars have held them back. Colonialism has held them back. Okay. And so people have a long ways to go just to get to the standards of East Africa before you start saying, well, how do they compare to France or somewhere? So there's a lot to be done. The other point, though, is that, as you know, the different colonial masters put different burdens on the people as they left. Some countries were told they have to pay millions of dollars back for the development of their country. Absolute nonsense, but it happened, and some countries are still paying 60 years later. And so that hurts development. And so in East Africa, they didn't get that burden to the same degree. So when the colonial master left, they were able to get going and start, doing things themselves. Whereas in West Africa, French West Africa in particular, that's a little different.
Wow, that's very exciting. I'm happy to know about it. Yes. I'm super excited to know about that. Then could you tell us a little bit about your first book, Immersed in West Africa? Also, are you currently working on another publication? If yes, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Okay. Well, the first book, I didn't really know how it would be received in the manner that I was writing, but the intent was to show today, to show how we got there, but to do it in a real easygoing way, an enjoyable way, so that people wouldn't pick it up and think, oh, I'm reading this history book, or this is so dull. I didn't want that. So I gave them the experience as I was going, but gave a background to most of the things that we did. I found the 5 countries I went to, most interesting. They all had their own different peculiarity. I started in Dakar, and I moved around to a different country every week, but I spent 3 weeks in Senegal in different parts each time. And I went to Mauritania with two objectives. One was to see the desert, going to the Sahara.
Yeah.
I'd never been in the Sahara before. Today I've been 3 times from 3 different countries, but then that was my first trip into the Sahara. The second reason I was going was to eyeball and see slavery in this modern world. As you know, a law was passed about 7, 8 years ago in Mauritania to make slavery illegal. You think, well, why would you need that? Because it's still practiced today as we sit here speaking. And I found that amazing. Just before I went up, I went to Gorée Island, and a young man, a university student, attached himself to me and became my guide. And so at one point we were sitting talking, and he said, well, where are you going after this? I said, oh, I'm going to Mauritania. Why? And I told him what I just told you. And he said, oh, you're wasting your time. I said, what do you mean I'm wasting my time? He said, you won't see it. You won't see it. And you know what? He was right. I didn't see it. I didn't see a thing. I didn't see a thing. The people who are in that condition are kept in the house and out of sight. So you just don't know. And of course, you know that Mauritania is the sort of bridge point between Arab Africa and Black Africa.
Yeah.
So as you go north in Mauritania, you're in Arab Africa. As you go south, you're in Black Africa. And that has implications. When I went out into the desert, I went into a town called Atta. I started there. And I was quite surprised because probably 50% of the people I saw just walking around were Black. I expected that when I got into the Sahara, I would only see the Arabs. So, well, not Arabs, but black Arabs, you know what I mean. So I was surprised by that. And it was very interesting. I found my experiences good. I enjoyed going to all the other places. The only place I was a little uptight about was Guinea-Bissau. I had met some guys in Gambia, one of whom had been actually a school teacher here in Bermuda. I didn't know him when he was here, but a friend of mine put me on to him, and we had a real good time together. And I'll tell you this story. I don't know if I have it in the book or not. I can't remember, but we were going into the countryside, and we were supposed to leave real early, then a little later, and finally we left at about 6 o'clock. We were driving along, everything was good. By 8 o'clock, it was dark. And as he drove, I saw a woman step out and ready for a ride. He just ignored it. I didn't say anything. Some more time went by, and a second woman stepped out and waited for a ride. And he drove past her. I thought, this is sort of strange, because the guy is a senior man in the Muslim community, and he runs a NGO. He's a overall good guy. So what's the problem? I didn't say anything. So finally, he said to me, Terry, did you see those 2 ladies? I said, yes. Well, tell me, why did you pick them up? And he laughed and he said, because they're not really women. They're evil spirits.
Oh.
That's what he told me. And he wouldn't budge from that. And so when we got back to Surakunda, we were sitting with some other guys and we're talking, and I'd tell them this story. And they all laugh and they say, of course, Terry, you can't pick them up. They're evil spirits. And I'm really perplexed by this. I hadn't heard it before. So we're in our further conversation, the guy's just interested to say, well, when you leave here, where are you going? And I say, oh, my next stop is Guinea-Bissau. I'm going to Bissau. And they look at each other and then they say to me, Terry, be very careful. If any woman looks in your direction, drop your eyes to the ground. I said, really? What? I said, yes. He said, I said, why? He said, because they could be evil spirits and they could seize your mind. so I of course don't know whether this is true or not, but during the time I was in Guinea-Bissau, I walked around looking at the ground most of the time.
That's hilarious. Wow, that's funny. That's funny. That's quite very funny. That's quite interesting. I love that. That's a very sort of nice, story to tell.
Well, different people do things different ways.
Yeah, sure.
When I left when I left Mauritania, for instance, I went to St. Louis in the northern part of Senegal. It's where the French ran their empire from, in St. Louis. So you go there, and I have an interesting experience there. The fellow who I met in Gambia, he had called a man he knew in St. Louis and said, look, this guy's coming through, pick him up, take him to dinner one night at your house, blah, blah, blah. And the guy was a young businessman. So on about the third or fourth day, the phone call comes and the guy says, yeah, we're going to come and get you. But he had another guy talking. So time comes, the guy picks me up. It's two of them. And the other one is doing all the talking. It turns out the man whose house I'm going to only speaks Wolof. He speaks no English. He speaks no French.
Wow.
Only Wolof. I, of course, can't even speak French. So we're at a loss. So we go to his house, meet his children and his wife. And the children were learning English in school, but they were bashful. So I'd say a few little things to them and they would smile and giggle and give an answer back. But they stayed out of it. They didn't really participate. So the guy and I are trying to talk, but it's very difficult to do so. So he then says, at one point, he says something to the fact that he has a brother who lives in Dakar, who speaks English. And so he calls his brother. He puts his brother on the phone to me. And the brother says, yeah, that's my brother. He's a good guy and all of this. He wants you to get your stuff from the hotel and stay with he and his family for the rest of your stay.
Oh.
Now, normally I will respond to a hospitable offer like that, but I just couldn't because how would we communicate? You know, and I was going to be there for 3 more days. I wouldn't have been able to communicate. And so I wanted to turn it down. So we talk a little bit again, waving our hands and all this sort of thing. It's really difficult. And then he remembers the guy in Gambia. So he calls him and they talk for a little bit. He gives me the phone and the guy in Gambia says the same thing. Says, look, he wants you to stay with him. I say, no, really, I can't. This won't work. And so he then explains it to the guy. We have a very nice dinner. He had a lovely family. Time to leave comes. And then he has me driven back to the hotel. When we get there, he gets out of the car as well, comes up to the room to inspect it, in essence, to see that I was living in decent conditions. Because if I wasn't, then he would, command me to join him and his family. Fortunately, I was in a nice enough hotel. They just shook my hand and left. But, that was an interesting experience to be with someone who really wanted to be very good to you, very nice to you, but you couldn't communicate. And some might have said to me, well, Terry, you should have learned some French. But I always say the opposite. I say to people, it's pointless trying to learn the national language because it's not the language of the people. In places like Cameroon, a lot of people speak French.
Yeah, sure.
And obviously in East Africa, a lot of people speak English.
Yeah.
But even in those countries, when you get away from the major cities, people speak in their historic native tongue.
Yeah, native language.
And so, yeah. So you don't get a lot of people in the villages speaking French. When you go to Ivory Coast, you have French all down in Abidjan and Grand Bassam and places like this. But once you get away from that, they have over 70 native languages. That's what they're speaking.
Wow.
So to me, it doesn't make sense for me to take my very, very, very poor French and try and improve on it if nobody's going to speak back to me in French. The taxi drivers in this part speak either Mendigo or Wolof. They do not speak French.
Yeah, that's very amazing. Now, I was going to ask you, as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still struggling with publishing a book? You're a publisher of 2 books, and I was looking forward to ask you, what sort of advice do you have for people who are still struggling to publish in a book like yours?
Well, I would suggest to anybody who thinks they want to write a book
Yeah.
that they spend a little time first learning the important thing, which is how to market the book.
Yeah.
When I wrote the end at the end of the first book, I actually thought I was finished. And I got on the plane a week later and went off to Africa and stayed for 8 weeks. And it was and I never, for the first 6 weeks, I never once went online to Amazon to see how my book was doing. I assumed it was doing fine. So at the end of 6 weeks, I went online and looked, and I couldn't believe it. The book had just disappeared and gone down the rabbit hole. And through time, I started to learn just how important the marketing of a book is.
Exactly.
I learned that as much as I love travel, and I think so many other people love travel, people don't love travel books in the same way. And there are 28 genres of books. Travel is number 27. We're right at the bottom. And so it means you have to work so much harder to get your book up and get it recognized, you know? And for the second book, I started writing it this past year, in April. I got it to the publisher in July. However, at that point, I started to prepare for the marketing. And I would sit home every day. I would get up in the morning, bath, breakfast, to my writing table. By 9:30, I was there, researching, working, doing the marketing side. I would break for lunch, break for dinner, and then I'd knock off at 9 o'clock at night.
Wow.
And I didn't attend to any of my other responsibilities. I just worked on the book. And I don't think most people realize that that's what authors do. I certainly didn't realize. I really thought when I wrote the end, it was the end. Instead, in travel, it's very hard to get reviews. You work very hard for reviews. It's very hard to get newsletter swap and things like that because nobody's really interested. If I have a mailing list, an email list of 1,000, and the next guy has 12, I don't want to swap with him, you see? And that's where travel writers find themselves until something happens. They write a book, it goes well, they become famous, and then they write 2 and 3, and it happens again, well, they're set. They can write any rubbish if they wanted to.
Sure.
But so until you get to that point, it's just plain hard work. And I believe that there are hundreds and hundreds of very good books that nobody ever reads.
Exactly.
Because
that's what I always say.
Yeah, there are hundreds of them, you know, but nobody reads them. Sometimes I'll see where books have won minor awards. And then the next year, you check that book out on Amazon, and the book's ranked number 1.8 million. Imagine. So how can a book win awards and be 1.8 million? Well, it happened because the writer still didn't get it about the marketing. Yeah. And I always look to see how many reviews a book has. And you'll see sometimes a book is 4 years old and it has 6 reviews. Well, the writer's not serious. He's just not serious. You can't have 6 reviews after 4 years and think your book's going to be anything other than 1.5 million.
It's hilarious.
Yeah. So that's what I would stress to anybody who thinks they want to write. Figure out how you're going to handle the post-writing period, not the writing period. If you want to write and it's in you, you can write a good book, but you got to sell it.
You got to sell it.
Yeah.
You got to sell it. That's actually one of those steps and section I've been saying over and over again that, you know, a lot of good books struggle and nobody know about them because of lack of marketing. Because I see marketing has much of the great pivotal role. It has a pivotal role to play when it comes to, you know, bringing a book out there. Because there are actually a lot of good books that languish in silence. And there are some not so well books that are selling millions. So people are craving that, oh, that book is good. I love it. Because what? They have good marketing. And that's one of the reason, that's one of the things I feel most independent published authors struggle with. Because they have they don't have the method or the right platform to promote their books because they don't just know how to go about it. And that's one of the reasons why we are here on P English Literature.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Mr. Terrelista. I so much appreciate your time, taking your time to attend to this interview together with Terrelista. He's the author of A New Day Dawn, My Solo Journey into West Africa. It's currently available on Amazon for some few dollars, and I left a link in the description part of this interview if you'd like to get a copy directly on Amazon. Thank you very much, Mr. Terrelista, for taking your time to join me in the interview. I so much appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it myself. This has been very good.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.